Welcome and thank you for joining us today. This webinar will provide a brief overview of the work that we conducted in Michigan's 2019 Local and Regional Food Systems Workforce Assessment. Today is the first of a series of webinars and publications that report on findings. Subsequent webinars and reports will provide more detail in each of the research areas. Michigan State University Center for Regional Food Systems collaborated with Kalamazoo Valley Community College, MSU Extension, and a Corporation for a Skilled Workforce to examine the local and regional food system workforce landscape in Michigan and the education and training needs for growth. As a team, we particularly like to acknowledge and express appreciation to all the stakeholders and employers that contributed their time and knowledge to this research. This work was made possible through funding from the W.K. Kellogg Foundation and Kalamazoo Valley Community College. Local and regional food systems development work in Michigan strives to improve lives and provide equitable outcomes for all. It is rooted in community and seeks through those communities to improve health through better healthy food access and to support economic development through increased sales for Michigan local and regional food businesses, which in turn can support better jobs. Building collaboration infrastructure around the goals of the Michigan Good Food Charter, a document that provides a roadmap for health and economic development outcomes, has been a focus for local and regional food system development in Michigan. As the work has developed, it's become increasingly important to better understand and ensure the workforce can grow and develop and strengthen communities. Agriculture and food workforce assessment studies have been conducted across the country, including Washington, Massachusetts, Vermont, Kansas, California, and Michigan. Assessments specific to local and regional food systems workforce, however, have only been completed in Massachusetts and Vermont, and with this study now in Michigan. Of the nearly 4 million households in Michigan, over 1 million, 29%, are comprised of people who work to make a living, but still have insufficient income to make ends meet. This significant proportion of our Michigan population is known as the asset-limited, income-constrained employed population, also known as ALICE. With this in mind, the workforce assessment we conducted had two underlying assumptions. Number one, availability of quality jobs is critical to improving communities and the economy. And number two, alongside the need to have quality jobs available comes a need to have communities trained to meet the job needs of their local and regional food system. The goals of this research, therefore, were to better understand the local and regional food system workforce and identify challenges and opportunities, and also to identify possible gaps and opportunities in education and training. Local and regional food systems can be defined in a number of ways. For the purposes of this workforce assessment, the local and regional food system encompass organizations that produce, process, and/or distribute food from Michigan that is available to Michigan's consumers and/or organizations that support this system. We state that produced refers to crops grown or animals raised in Michigan. Processed refers to food products processed or manufactured in Michigan, usually using primarily Michigan-produced foods. Distributed goods are ones that originate in Michigan but may cross state boundaries. Consumption is the endpoint for Michigan food products. Consumers can be individuals, households, or institutions. These consumers do not need to be in Michigan, but the majority should be in the Upper Great Lakes region. This definition was created for the purpose of providing boundaries for this work, with discussion from the Corporation for a Skilled Workforce, CRFS, MSU Extension, and Kalamazoo Valley Community College. CSW was contracted to collect data and report out under the direction of a steering committee made up of staff from CRFS, Kalamazoo Valley Community College, and MSU Extension. Project research areas included a scan of Michigan's seem to have moved on there. The project research areas included a scan of Michigan's food systems jobs. Note this was a broader food systems scan and not specific to local and regional food systems. An employer's perspective of Michigan's local and regional food system workforce through a survey, a series of interviews with food system stakeholders that complemented the survey data, a scan of other food systems workforce research, and a scan of training opportunities in Michigan, and finally some worker profiles. The CSW team used both primary data collected from employers, workers, educators, training providers, and other relevant stakeholders within the Michigan local and regional food system in the spring of 2019. In addition, they collated secondary data sets and information from different sources, including MC and burning glass technologies. And I'll hand over to Janine.
Great, thanks, Jude. So as Jude mentioned, one of the first steps for our team was to look at the available data and information to try to get a broad view of what's happening within the food system in Michigan. And so this analysis looked at a set of key occupations from within 5 identified industry groups that make up the food system. That includes food production, farm input, food manufacturing and processing, wholesale distribution, and food retail sales. And as Jude mentioned, it's important to note that this secondary data analysis we did was for the entire food system, not specifically for the local and regional food system. In part, that was because of the data sources available, some time constraints, and the general project scope of this work, as it is a bit of a difficult process to disaggregate employment in the regional food system from looking at it across the whole food system in Michigan. Given these constraints, we looked at a set of employment numbers as well as wages and some other things across the entire food system. And we did that so that we could get a broad understanding of how jobs are distributed in general, and to allow us to more narrowly focus on which employers and which jobs and workers we wanted to specifically target within the local regional food system. These core industries are the set of industries and within them some occupations that are available through data sets like the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And within the Bureau of Labor Statistics, we were able to use the North American Industry Classification System codes, otherwise known as NAICS codes, to pull the available labor market data for these industry sectors. This selection of core industries was also informed and influenced by looking at the studies that had been conducted in other states, as well as looking at research and reports that MSU had done previously around modeling local food systems value. In addition to looking at these core industries, we also looked at some allied industries associated with local and regional food systems, and those included things like waste management and food recovery, looking at advocacy groups, education and training providers, agricultural marketing and commodities organizations, community food services, as well as financial institutions and large allied consumers associated with the system, such as hospitals, schools, residential facilities, prisons, and other institutions. In addition to looking at just the jobs that are available, we also wanted to get a better sense of total employment and average earnings for these top 5 core sectors. And so across the sectors, the scan showed that there was a wide range in the number of people employed and the average earnings data within these 5 groups. In the full job scan report, we show the breakdown of jobs in key occupations within each of these sectors. We also show their median salary and the type of training that's required for these occupations. The report also describes the projected changes in these jobs through 2023 and looks at the typical job training that is required for people to have access to these jobs, as well as to be able to move up within them. In looking at the projected job growth across these 5 sectors, we saw that a number of jobs were expected to grow in the meat, poultry, and fish cutter area. We also saw that veterinary technologists were going to see higher growth over the next 5 years, and a number of jobs that are in an area called transportation, distribution, and logistics. And those include labor and freight material movers, industrial truck and tractor operators, and heavy tractor trailer drivers. In addition to this, we're also going to see some growth in the area where we have institutional and cafeteria service and cooks working. The job scan data and report also show that wages have risen at a higher annual rate than other industries in the state. We also looked at how these wages compare to those food system jobs nationally, and wages for these jobs in Michigan are also increasing at a faster rate than similar jobs nationally. The wages in Michigan grew at about 3.2% in 2017 and 2018, compared to 2.4% growth on average across all industries in the state during that same time period. We also looked at the reviews. We also looked at the top requested food systems workforce skills required by employers. An analysis of 2 years of Michigan job posting data showed that the commonly requested skills clusters across the food system industries included food safety, handling and preparation, customer service, sales, and business management. As part of this scan, we also then looked at this overarching set of data to try to target which employers we wanted to reach out to for our survey. And Caitlin is going to talk a little bit about what we found in the survey results.
Thanks, Janine. And just a reminder that if you have any questions throughout the presentation, feel free to type them in the Q&A box. We'll be happy to address them as we go and then at the end. So I will go through the survey of business responses. And the goal of the survey was to gather perceptions of the job market from employers of businesses and organizations currently operating within the local and regional food system in Michigan. And the survey was organized into 3 different sections, which you can see here on the slide. So current job openings, hiring practices and retention was one. The typical skills and qualifications needed for the respondent staff was another. And then the respondents' use of and need for additional training for their workers was the last one. So the survey was sent to approximately 2,046 individuals and organizations that was compiled from an existing distribution list from the Center for Regional Food Systems at MSU, MSU Extension, and an additional 116 businesses that were obtained from the Michigan Bureau of Labor Market Information and Strategic Initiatives. And the survey was conducted in the spring of this year, 2019. So we received 143 responses, which resulted in a response rate of 7%, which we acknowledge is rather low, and we'll talk about that next, or just the caution that should be taken. So what you see here is the spread of responses in terms of the sectors that were represented. And as I mentioned, the low response rate affected the mix of organizations who responded, with overrepresentation in food production, retail, and nonprofit organizations. So just generally, some caution should be taken in generalizing the survey responses across food system subsectors, but we still thought it was worthwhile to share these results. And to enhance the results of the survey, an additional 10 food systems employers participated in follow-up interviews. So interview candidates were selected from survey respondents who volunteered to participate in follow-up interviews, and then from a short list of recommended employers that were procured during key informant interviews. A total of 35 organizations were contacted for interviews for a response rate of 29%. And then I'll get into the findings. So in terms of current job openings, hiring practices, and retention, less than half of respondents, 41%, had current job openings. And of those, the number of job openings ranged from 1 to 20, with an average of just less than 5. Survey respondents were able to provide multiple reasons for job vacancies, which is shown on the graph that you're seeing, the top graph. So the majority of current job openings were due to replacing workers lost to attrition. That was 70%. Additionally, nearly 60% of respondents also said that these openings were due to growth within their organization. And only 12.8% of respondents were filling job vacancies caused by retirement. So in the future, 86% of respondents expected to hire at least one new worker over the next 1 to 3 years, and only 14% expected to have no hiring needs. Further findings in hiring and retention were that employer respondents indicated the following trends with regard to their pool of applicants for their vacancies. 31% said that they are seeing a lack of workplace skills generally. 26% said that they had applicants experiencing transportation issues. And the lack of previous work experience, which 19% of respondents indicated within their applicant pools, made them difficult to hire or retain in employment. So 18% of respondents said that they didn't face any hiring challenges. And then to add a little more context, employers shared that they were not able to provide competitive wages or offer benefits. That's 36% and 32% of respondents respectively. And a tight labor market was also a reason for there not being enough qualified candidates for any given job. And then that same tight labor market is also a factor in losing candidates to a competitor who could offer higher wages or benefits. And this trend was particularly strong in food retail or food service employers that were interviewed. So then we had some findings in terms of typical skills and qualifications requested in job openings by local and regional food systems employers. And the levels of education requested in job openings by the employers surveyed reflects a typical rising progression in the level of education required with the seniority of the role, which is sort of to be expected. But interestingly, across the seniority levels, approximately 20 to 23% of survey respondents do not have any formal education requirements for their organization's roles, which is shown on the graph that you're seeing in the lightest blue on the right. And then respondents were asked what additional industry certifications they look for when hiring a candidate. And these certificates focus on specific technical skills or knowledge and are often mandated by both company policy and state law. So for example, certification in food safety handling, which is most commonly ServSafe for handlers and managers, was cited by 57% of respondents as being required. The survey also asked about skills difficult to find in new hires. So the top 3 workplace skills that employers say are most difficult to find for local and regional food systems are the 3 that are highlighted at the top of the graph that you're seeing. So communication, which was 23%, work ethic, 19%, and reliability, 17%. So employers seem more likely to hire someone with these attributes compared to someone with more technical experience, opting instead to teach the technical skills on the job. And that was demonstrated by just over half of respondents saying that they forego skills and train on the job, and 22% said that they forego hiring until they can find a suitable candidate. And then interview participants did admit that less experience allows them to hire at a lower wage. And then lastly, economic growth and limited access to capital were the most commonly cited factors potentially impacting staffing needs over the next 1 to 3 years. And a lack of available workforce, expansion in existing markets, and increased organizational expenses were also at the top of that list. And with that, I will pass it on to Rachel to talk about the education and training opportunities scan.
Great. So now we will move on to a review of the many training opportunities and educational offerings across Michigan that are pertinent to the job needs in the local and regional food system. But first, to return to the data from Burning Glass that was part of the job scan that Janine discussed earlier. This data summarizes the education and experience requirements of over 36,000 recent job postings in the food system. And it corroborates the story from our employer survey that Caitlin just outlined, specifically that over 55% of the jobs in the food system do not require more than high school or vocational training, and 35% require a bachelor's degree or higher credential, only 10% seeking an associate's degree. And regardless of educational level required, 64% of job openings do not require more than 2 years of experience. So this would indicate that there could be demand for food systems training at the high school level or even earlier in K-12 education, as well as a need for emphasis on associates to bachelor's pipelines in higher education. The next step in our study was to conduct an environmental scan of available food systems training opportunities. And so the Corporation for a Skilled Workforce collected data on 744 Michigan-based education and training programs related to food systems. As much as possible, the researchers attempted to document programs focused on the local and regional food system, but identifying regionally tailored programs was difficult without reviewing individual course curriculum. The programs identified span after-school youth programs like 4-H, to workforce training, to certificate and degree programs at community colleges, and also programs at four-year universities. The initial inventory conducted in the study is heavily concentrated on that post-secondary sector, post-secondary programs, because they're more easily identifiable in publicly available data sets. This highlights the limitations in gathering information on youth serving programs, both offered by nonprofits and in K-12 academic settings. It also concentrated heavily on workforce programming offered in non-academic institutions. So more integrated educational programs like farm to cafeteria initiatives and school gardens would not be captured here. A more detailed table which breaks out the programs by career pathway will be available in the written report. And one of the key takeaways from that more detailed data is that food systems input and services as a sector had the greatest number of programs. We believe that's due to the diverse nature of this category and also the technical nature of the careers in this category. What's important to note here on the summary table is that the K-12 programs totals were limited across the state, despite what we just learned about from the job scan, that the majority of entry-level positions in the food system are requiring just a high school training. The majority of those K-12 programs that we did find, it's actually 41 out of the 46 identified, were offered focused on agricultural production. The next slide shows the geographic availability of training programs, which we find aligns with population centers, as would be expected. So the northeast part of Michigan and areas in the UP have fewer training programs, some counties having none at all, while the Detroit and Lansing areas have the highest concentrations of education and training programs. The full education and training scan report will include a directory of education and training opportunities and highlight the number of education opportunities in each county by career pathway. Finally, to return to our employer survey, we asked employers where they access training for their employees when a need is identified. Common sources were through MSU, MSU Extension, or specific programs or departments at MSU, also through statewide associations and trade groups, such as MIFMA, the Michigan Restaurant Association, and the School Nutrition Association of Michigan, MIFMA, of course, being the Michigan Farmers Market Association, followed by other educational institutions that offer training programs. State, federal, and local government agencies and community nonprofits and other public resources like these were accessed by a smaller but still significant number of employers and trainees. And finally, some are turning to web-based resources like videos on YouTube and online trainings like those offered by Ridgedale Permaculture. And given trends toward online delivery in education in general, we would suggest that this is a growing platform for training information. So now we move to our next steps. This research, which took into account secondary workforce data, information on availability of education and training, and the input of employers and stakeholders, identified some opportunities for action that can be taken to close specific education and training related gaps and improve job quality. Broad recommendations for this work include developing solutions in partnership with business, being prepared to adapt trainings to focus on targeted areas of need and introduce new opportunities at the level where they will provide the most benefit. Working to provide better information about food system jobs, career pathways, education, and training opportunities. This communication should begin early in K-12 education so that it can lead to students taking advantage of programs available at high school levels. Integrating services for business assistance, workforce development support, and training for employees to more comprehensively support food system businesses. And finally, to explore cross-sector partnerships that can improve job readiness, access, and quality. It bears noting here that some of the findings of this report reflect broader economic trends, such as employer inability to pay living wages or offer benefits, the need for soft skills like communication and customer service, and the influence of structural factors like transportation and childcare support on worker ability to meet employer expectations. If we are to attempt to address these challenges, cross-sector partnerships will be especially crucial. And with that, that concludes the information on the current study, and I'll turn it back to Jude.
Thanks, Rachel. I think Caitlin and Janine have been receiving questions. Did you?
Yes, we have a couple. So one that came in was, how was work ethic defined for respondents? We can't hear you, Janine.
Yeah, I'll unmute her. There we go.
She's muted.
Yes. Oh, here I am. Great. Yeah, so actually the question about work ethic is a great one, and it builds on what Rachel was just saying about some of the broader trends we're seeing across different parts of the economy. And that is that a lot of employers talk about work ethic, and typically what we hear that meaning is the availability of workers, the reliability of workers, the punctuality, as well as to some extent productivity. And so a lot of times all of those things are, especially for lower wage workers who may be working more than one job, there's other structural factors like transportation, childcare, et cetera, that affect worker ability to meet those kinds of work ethic expectations. And we did hear from employers that they're open to and trying to think about ways that they can better support their workforce.
Time for another question, Jude, or? Yes. So one was, what or why was the job scan not specific to local and regional food systems?
Yeah, so in terms of that, we unfortunately, the process or the approach for doing, looking more closely at the local and regional food system requires some additional modeling work that just would take more time than what we had available in this current scope. There is a methodology that Vermont has used to try to more specifically look at that. So it's a methodology is available. It's just a matter of implementing that methodology. And I think that's something we'd like to look at for further research.
Great. Well, thank you very much, team. And thank you to all that have joined us today. We hope that you'll be able to join us for future webinars where we will provide further data and findings on each of the pieces of this research. We'll be doing another webinar specifically on the Michigan Food Systems Job Scan, We'll have a third webinar on the survey of employers that identified challenges and opportunities for developing our workforce. And we'll conclude with a webinar on February 13th, looking at an in-depth description of the workforce and training opportunities in Michigan's local and regional food systems. Thank you again for joining us, and goodbye.